Welcome to a record preserved in the archives of the United States Navy, dated June 4, 1942. The entry begins with a single sentence transcribed from a combat communication log, smoke rising from the water. 4 silhouettes of carriers all aflame. We lost radio contact shortly after the first hits. The statement was entered by a communications officer aboard Task Force 16 operating northeast of Midway Atoll. It is not written for posterity nor for interpretation. It is a procedural note serving the function of situational reporting, stripped of sentiment and composition. The document containing this line is a composite record of sequential observations. Each component originates from a different office: communications, gunnery, engineering, flight operations, medical, and intelligence. Together, they constitute a fragmentary chronology of a 4-minute period in which 4 capital ships of the Imperial Japanese Navy sustained catastrophic damage. Each sub-record preserves its departmental tone, mechanical, administrative, and free of speculation. The first section of the bundle, labeled Contact Report, begins at 0920 Zulu time. Entries are recorded in standard naval shorthand. Radar contact bearing 043, range 35 miles. Unidentified aircraft, altitude 12,000 feet. Fighters vectored to intercept. The phrasing follows procedure report, confirm relay. There is no narrative continuity, only the steady transcription of position and intent. Adjacent to these signals are handwritten additions by flight deck officers: smoke column sighted to port, bombers climbing through cloud layer, deck crews to stations. The handwriting itself reveals urgency, but the content remains factual. There are no adjectives of emotion, no exclamatory punctuation. The officers who wrote these lines were trained to report, not to interpret. Further down the log, a shift in notation appears. Between 10:22 and 10:26 Zulu, the entries cease to mark bearings and begin to record effects. First hit observed on carrier Akagi. Large explosion aft. Flames amidships. Radio silence from enemy group. The lines are sequential. The spacing, even the handwriting, still precise. Only the subject matter changes from detection to destruction. Attached to the same set are pilot logs recovered from air group reports aboard USS Enterprise and USS Yorktown. One such entry reads, launched 0912, bomb release 25. Visual confirmation of direct hit. Enemy deck engulfed. Another dive angle 70 degrees, altitude reduction from 12,000. Released at 1,000. Immediate detonation. Each pilot's entry is framed by time, altitude, and coordinates. The log does not describe sensation or perception. It is a statement of operation completed and target result observed. Below the operational logs appear the deck and engineering records. These are the voices of the ships themselves, the language of material response. Port side plating ruptured. Fuel line severed. Fire control engaged. Pump 2 inoperative. These statements are the shipboard equivalent of biological notes on injury. They specify what has been damaged, not how it feels. Medical registers follow the same format. They list the injured and the dead with numeric precision. Burns 2nd and 3rd degree 6 personnel. Smoke inhalation, 3 cases. Fatalities 27 confirmed. Each entry is a unit in an accounting of consequence. The form of the record ensures that no observation exceeds its evidentiary function. Intelligence reports appended to the set provide additional confirmation. At 10:35 Zulu, decoded transmissions from the Japanese task group were partially intercepted. Deck burning. Unable to launch aircraft. Loss of control. The English translation is marked as provisional. The intercept sheet includes notations of signal quality, fragmentary, low confidence. Each fragment adds another line of administrative corroboration. Where silence occurs, where communication lines fail, the absence is marked explicitly. No transmission received after 10:27. Channel dead. The silence itself becomes data and index of destruction. The report does not conjecture what happened between those minutes. It merely records that the record stopped. Each document in the bundle maintains its procedural authority by refusing embellishment. Together, they produce the composite picture of a rapid collapse, 4 carriers struck. In close succession, communications interrupted command structure, broken smoke visible across the horizon. The neutrality of tone paradoxically sharpens the magnitude of the event. A later memorandum by a staff historian attached in 1943, clarifies the origin of these documents. They were gathered from multiple sources, ship logs retrieved after the battle, surviving aircraft reports, and intercept records preserved by naval intelligence. The memorandum notes that this material is retained in original form to preserve administrative integrity. It is therefore not a reconstruction, but a preservation of the language used at the moment of recording. The bundle's organization mirrors the Navy's hierarchical logic: operations first, damage second, intelligence third, medical last. The order implies that in warfare, perception precedes interpretation, and reporting continues until silence replaces communication. Once silence occurs, the record ceases. This is the structural principle underlying all military documentation. Reading through the log chronologically produces a sense of acceleration, though no words express speed. Time itself condenses in the sequence of entries: detection, strike, combustion, cessation. The event consumes itself inside the record's syntax. No commentary describes chaos. The format renders it through the compression of consecutive minutes. An appended index, likely prepared by archivists decades later, lists the surviving officers whose handwriting appears in the logs. Many of those officers did not live beyond the year of the battle. Their handwriting remains the only trace of individual agency in a collection otherwise defined by institutional voice. The contrast between mechanical language and mortal circumstance defines the archival atmosphere. The initial line, "smoke rising from the water," 4 silhouettes of carriers all aflame, thus functions as both literal observation and structural overture. It announces the transition from procedure to absence. The smoke signifies damage. The silhouettes mark identification. The phrase "radio contact lost" signals the entry into silence that defines the remainder of the bundle. This opening record serves as an orientation for everything that follows in the documentary, a war described not through rhetoric, but through transcription. Each subsequent portion of the archive, the contact reports, the intercepted signals, the damage assessments, retains the same neutrality. Together, they demonstrate how the most decisive 4 minutes in the Pacific War were documented not by grand narrative, but by meticulous notation. The voice preserved in these lines does not attempt to explain why events unfolded as they did. It only verifies that they occurred. Within the boundaries of this record, causation remains implicit, confined to operational detail. Human intention and consequence are measurable only through time coordinates and silence. The archival record begins and ends with communication: the sending of signals, their reception, their loss. When the signals stop, the record stops. That is the endpoint of this document, and the moment where analysis must give way to evidence. Before we begin, leave a comment telling where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening. These moments, preserved across distance, mirror the fragments of those original transmissions, brief, factual, and human in their persistence. The documents preserved for this record trace the reasoning and operational design that brought 2 fleets to convergence at Midway Atoll in June 1942. They reveal no single decision, but an accumulation of intentions, assumptions, and procedures on both sides of the Pacific. The archival voice that speaks through them is administrative, sometimes mathematical recording logic, rather than emotion. Following the attack on Pearl Harbor in December 1941, the Imperial Japanese Navy achieved near-total control of the Western Pacific. Within 6 months, its carrier force had struck as far west as the Indian Ocean. Reports from the Combined Fleet headquarters during the spring of 1942 show a confidence bordering on inevitability. The enemy has been weakened to the point of strategic paralysis. Further operations will ensure lasting supremacy. Yet beneath this formal assurance lay logistical strain and uncertainty about how long such expansion could be sustained. The Japanese High Command believed that another decisive engagement, conducted at a time and place of their choosing, would remove American carriers from the war and compel the United States to negotiate. American planning memoranda from the same months record an opposite premise. The United States Navy, reorganized after Pearl Harbor, understood that it could not yet meet Japan with battleships. Only its carriers could operate offensively. These were limited to 3 Enterprise Hornet and Yorktown, each required for reconnaissance, defense, and strike operations simultaneously. The task set by Admiral Chester W. Nimitz to his intelligence section was therefore not simply to predict Japan's next move, but to do so with enough precision to position these few ships advantageously. The problem was informational, not numerical. The informational asymmetry that would define the Battle of Midway began in early 1942 at Station Hypo in Pearl Harbor, where cryptanalysts under Commander Joseph Rochefort worked to decode the Japanese operational cipher known as JN-25B. The intercepted traffic contained frequent references to a target code-named AF. To confirm its meaning, analysts suggested transmitting a false message indicating that Midway's desalination plant had failed. When Japanese intercepts later reported that AF is short of water, the identification was confirmed. The administrative record of that deception, typed, dated, and signed, exists within the same series that now documents the battle itself. The Japanese plan, designated Operation MI, was conceived by Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto as an extension of Pearl Harbor's logic. The intention was to draw out the remaining American carriers into an ambush near Midway, where Japan's superior numbers would ensure annihilation. The operation required complex coordination, a diversionary assault on the Aleutian Islands, a main strike on Midway, and a surface fleet trailing far behind to finish any surviving American ships. The planning papers retrieved from post-war archives in Tokyo specify sequential movements and timings, each expressed with the precision of staff work. Kido Butai will depart. Hashirajima 27 May proceed at 24 knots, launch first strike at dawn on 4th June. Nothing in these documents acknowledges the possibility of foreknowledge on the part of the enemy. In Washington and Pearl Harbor, Admiral Nimitz read those same probabilities in reverse. His directive of 27th May stated that the enemy will strike Midway early June and that U.S. forces will proceed to intercept and ambush. The reversal of expectation, each side believing it would surprise the other, is the essential symmetry recorded in the operational orders. Both fleets departed confident that intelligence favored them. Weather reports entered into ship logs during the last days of May record steady easterly winds and clear horizons, conditions that would allow wide visibility for carrier aircraft. These meteorological notations, detached from strategy, acquire significance in retrospect. They provided the open sky in which one side would misread the sky. The Japanese task force, relying on visual reconnaissance and scout planes, limited by range, assumed that any enemy presence would be detected before the first strike. American commanders relied on radar and cryptographic insight technologies that replaced sight with signal. The divergence between these two modes of perception, one empirical, one electronic, set the framework for the battle. On the morning of 12 June 1942, the first line of the operational diary of Task Force 16 reads simply, "At 0400 Midway, radar detected multiple contacts bearing 320 distance 93 miles. This notation corresponds with Japanese records, indicating that the Akagi and Soryu had launched their first wave aircraft minutes earlier, 108 planes, including Aichi D-3A Type 99 dive bombers, escorted by 0 fighters. The Japanese intention was to neutralize Midway's airfields before the U.S. fleet could interfere. The American interpretation of the same radar blips was that the enemy had revealed its position. Two systems of knowledge met on a charted line of longitude, each verifying its own correctness. The strategic objectives that converge here are recorded in neutral language. The Japanese aim to eliminate remaining U.S. carriers and secure an extended defensive perimeter. The American aim to preempt and destroy the Japanese carrier force before its superiority could be reasserted. The plans differ not in method, both depended on the same triad of reconnaissance timing and concentrated air power, but in assumption. The Japanese staff papers reflect faith in secrecy and in the efficiency of their trained aviators. The American orders reveal faith in information, decoded signals, radar contacts, and the mathematical prediction of time and bearing. The records do not express belief. They record procedure. From these procedures, the logic of the battle becomes visible. Japan's plan depended upon surprise. America's depended upon foreknowledge. When the two conditions met, surprise inverted itself. The archival evidence shows the exact moment the inversion began, 30 hours, when aircraft launched from Yorktown and Enterprise took off toward coordinates derived from decrypted traffic rather than scouting reports. Japanese communications, still believing their position undiscovered, proceeded with refueling and rearming operations below deck, a routine that would prove fatal once American bombers appeared overhead. The broader strategic intent of Japan's combined fleet, as expressed in its preparatory orders, was to destroy not only the enemy's carriers, but its morale. Admiral Yamamoto's memorandum dated 15 May 1942 states, "A single decisive engagement is required. The enemy once defeated will abandon further offensive effort." American memoranda used similar phrasing, but with inverse meaning. Success at Midway will restore strategic initiative. These statements mirror each other in grammar and in overconfidence. The documents contain no hint of doubt. Among the American fleet, the ship that would bear the brunt of Japan's first successful counterstrike was USS Yorktown CV-5. The carrier had been hastily repaired after damage sustained at the Coral Sea. Log entries from her engineering department list incomplete work still in progress as she departed Pearl Harbor. At 12:02 on 4 June, Yorktown recorded enemy dive bombers approaching altitude 14,000. Within minutes, she was hit twice by bombs released from Japanese aircraft, launched from Akagi and Soryu. Deck fires followed, power was lost, and communications ceased temporarily. These events are cross-referenced in both American and Japanese archives, each side noting the time almost identically. The convergence of two languages, one reporting attack, the other reporting success, constitutes the moment when strategic intention became irreversible fact. By the evening of 4th of June, 3 Japanese carriers, Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu, were ablaze, their decks shattered by American dive bombers. The 4th Hiryu continued the fight briefly before succumbing. The operational diaries of both fleets end their entries that night with single lines: "Fire out of control," "Abandoned ship." The calm phrasing in each language is nearly identical. The logic that began as plan and signal concludes as notation of loss. The existence of these documents allows the battle to be reconstructed not as a legend, but as a record of intentions meeting consequences. The paper trail preceding the engagement, the synchronized times of action, and the abrupt termination of communications reveal how strategic design can collapse in minutes. What remains in the archive is the residue of calculation-coded messages, flight schedules, ship positions, and the silence that followed. The transmissions that follow begin without warning, carrying the language of immediate contact, bearing lines. Gunfire reports and the first eyewitness descriptions of the sky over Midway turning to flame. The first recorded entry for the morning of 4th of June 1942 begins at 400 hours local time. The radar station on Sand Island, Midway Atoll, noted multiple contacts bearing 320 range 93 miles. The signalman's handwriting is careful, the notation unembellished. It is the first verifiable data point of the engagement. The next line, recorded 4 minutes later, reads, "Contacts increasing. Altitude estimated 12,000. Intercept ordered." The order referred to Marine Fighter Squadron 221, whose aircraft were already warming on the Coral runway. At 04:15, the Midway operations log lists F-4F Wildcats and Brewster Buffaloes airborne. Their mission summary sheet, typed later the same day, identifies 18 aircraft launched. Beneath that entry appears the first human detail preserved in the record: visibility 15 miles. Sun at 30 degrees above horizon. Enemy formation observed at 0455, approximately 30 miles northwest. The format of the report: time observation action never deviates. On the Japanese side, the carrier Akagi recorded a similar time. 0430, first wave airborne. Attack group 108 planes. Target Midway airfield and installations. The flight leader's subsequent statement, recovered from post-war documents, notes: no enemy opposition encountered during assembly. For nearly half an hour, both records parallel each other, two sets of aircraft ascending into the same sky, each unaware of the other's exact position. At 0555, the first bombs fell on Midway. The American base operations log summarizes the damage: runway cratered, hangar number 2 destroyed, fuel storage burning. Japanese strike reports add their own data. Attack commenced 558. Enemy anti-aircraft fire heavy. Bombs released 6:02:6:06. Both sets of times, once adjusted for differences in record keeping, align within a margin of 3 minutes. The neutrality of phrasing, no adjectives, only observation, gives the record its peculiar intensity. During this same period, Midway's B-17 bombers were already outbound. A mission report filed by the 431st Bomb Squadron reads, Takeoff 0430. Target enemy carriers. Area searched 100-200 miles northwest. No visual contact. Bombs released by radar estimate 0755. The report concludes with results unobserved. There are no claims, no speculation. The language of uncertainty becomes a factual category in itself. Between Oro 700 and Soro 830, successive American squadrons attempted to locate and strike the Japanese fleet. The carrier Hornet's torpedo squadron VT-8, flying obsolete TBD Devastators, departed at 0710. The log lists 15 aircraft last contact 0845. Subsequent communications transcripts include a fragment, torpedoes away under attack. No further signals were received. Post-battle reconciliation of records determined that all but one aircraft were lost. The sole survivor's account filed after rescue is included in the same folder. Approach made at wavetop altitude. Released torpedo at 800 yards. Intense fighter opposition. Plane hit. It is written in standard Navy report format ending with the line mission completed. At approximately the same time, Enterprise launched her torpedo squadron VT-6. The action report notes takeoff 740. Enemy sighted 0920. Torpedoes launched. Heavy losses. No hits observed. These sentences, when cross-checked with Japanese ship logs, correspond to the period when the Kaga and Akagi reported enemy torpedo planes approaching from low altitude. Japanese anti-aircraft batteries fired continuously for 7 minutes. At Oro 930, their gunnery officers recorded all enemy aircraft destroyed. Own damage nil. Both records, attacker and defender, share the same finality of tone. In these early attacks, the American forces suffered extreme losses. VT-8, VT-6, and VT-3 from Yorktown would collectively lose 35 of 41 aircraft. The reports entered later that day list pilot names, aircraft numbers, and the word missing repeated in sequence. There is no elaboration. The mechanical repetition transforms individual fates into data. From the Japanese perspective, the period between 0700 and 0930 appears in the Akagi's flight log as first enemy attack repelled. A notation adds enemy strength insufficient. Prepare second strike on Midway. That instruction initiated the process that would within an hour leave the decks of Akagi Kaga and Soryu filled with refueling aircraft and exposed ordnance. The order is recorded precisely at 0945. Its existence in the record marks the hinge upon which the battle would turn. Between the failed American torpedo attacks and the forthcoming dive bomber strikes lies a span of silence in the logs. Communications from the U.S. squadrons cease. Those from the Japanese carriers are routine. Refueling proceeding as planned. Second wave aircraft being armed. These lines convey procedural calm. The archival tempo slows the handwriting steady, unaware of interruption. Meanwhile, Midway-based B-26 Marauders and TBF Avengers operating beyond their designed range had also attempted torpedo runs. The mission debriefs retrieved from field notes on Eastern Island document the same pattern: attacked enemy carrier under fire. Torpedo released. Aircraft hit. Pilot did not return. One surviving crew report, typewritten and signed, ends abruptly mid-sentence. The archivist's annotation notes page torn incomplete. The absence of conclusion functions as evidence of destruction. At 1000, the Yorktown's flight operations log records the launch of 16 SBD Dauntless dive bombers under Lieutenant Commander Maxwell Leslie. Their departure coincided with Enterprise's Scouting Squadron 6 and Bombing Squadron 6 taking off under Commander Wade McCluskey. These groups would converge later over the Japanese fleet. The early part of their flight appears as a series of positional coordinates. McCluskey's after-action statement included verbatim reads, "Unable to locate enemy on expected bearing. Altered course northwest. Sighted destroyer on independent heading. Followed track to main body." This factual sequence navigation choice following lack of contact links directly to the later discovery of the Japanese carriers. Within the Japanese records, the same period is summarized differently. 1000 to 1020, all fighters on CAP combat air patrol. Bombers below deck refueling. Rearm second strike for Midway. The phrase below deck refueling appears 3 times in the hour's entries. Each repetition reinforces procedure. None anticipates risk. The bureaucratic certainty of the entries reveals the structure of assumption. Between 10:20 and 10:25, the American dive bombers began their descent. The exact time alignment is confirmed through both sides' logs. The Kaga records enemy dive bombers sighted overhead 10:22, while Enterprise's air group report lists attack commenced 10:23. This intersection of time and observation is the point where fact becomes irreversible. But in the chronology preserved in the archives, the first attacks, the morning's long hours of search, failed torpedo runs, and initial bombings of Midway itself constitute the foundation. They are the documented rhythm of miscalculation preceding the 4 minutes that would define the outcome. The early records close with the line from Akagi's gunnery officer, "Enemy air attacks persist. Deck preparations continue." The same minute Enterprise's strike group was already diving through the sunlight. The archival transition is almost invisible. One entry ends, another begins. The silence between them is less than a page. The evidence contained within these early logs, detected signals, failed attacks, and routine preparations, forms the factual skeleton of the battle before recognition. The tone of each entry remains neutral, yet the accumulation conveys acceleration. Reports narrow from paragraphs to single lines, from observation to reaction, as if the language itself compresses under pressure. The result is an official memory of imminence, a battle recorded before it understood itself as one. The documents cease at 10:25. The next page, when opened in the archive, begins with heat and fragmentation entries written by different hands at different times, describing the same horizon, suddenly filled with fire. The chronological alignment of the surviving records places the decisive aerial assaults between 10:20 and 10:45 hours on 4 June 1942. The Japanese carriers were then operating approximately 200 miles northwest of Midway. At that hour, all 4 decks were crowded with refueling and rearming aircraft. The administrative logs from Akagi, Kaga, and Soryu note the same condition in identical phrasing: flight deck occupied, second strike being armed, fuel lines active. It is within this procedural moment that the American dive bombers appeared. The Enterprise Air Group 6 report opens with the sentence, "Enemy carriers sighted at 10:20. 2 vessels course southeast, speed 25 knots. The next lines record descent angles and bomb releases. Attack commenced 10:23. Altitude 12,000. Dive angle 70 degrees. 2 1,000-pound LB bombs released." The Yorktown's Bombing Squadron 3 report mirrors it, precisely differing only in target designation. Commenced dive at 10:25 on carrier 3rd in column. Bomb released at 1,500 feet. Direct hit observed. The structure of these reports. Time altitude weapon result reflects institutional rhythm rather than excitement. They mark events in minutes, not emotions. Within the Japanese logs, parallel entries confirm the same interval in inverse terms. The Kaga action report reads, 10:22 enemy dive bombers sighted overhead. Altitude estimated 3,000 meters. Commenced evasive maneuver. 2 minutes later, multiple hits. Fire on deck. Steering damaged. The handwriting shifts mid-line, suggesting the officer was recording under duress. The Akagi log lists hit near amidships. Aircraft on deck burning. Communications severed. The Soryu entry is shorter still, hit 3 times. Fire uncontrolled. Each record ends abruptly, followed by notations added later in a different hand: ship lost. These brief phrases represent the point at which structured record-keeping broke under physical destruction. From the American perspective, the same events appear in the form of mission debriefs compiled hours later aboard Enterprise. Pilot reports are uniform in format, each beginning with identification, time of attack, and claimed result. One reads, "Hit observed on large carrier forward of island structure. Explosion followed immediately. Another target covered in smoke. Second vessel burning." The debriefing officer's summary consolidates the statements into a single line. 3 enemy carriers hit and burning by 10:30. It is the earliest official confirmation of victory, though at that time none of the American crews knew which carriers they had struck. Japanese communications during the same period convey a different perception. Surviving intercepts translated after the battle include fragments such as Kaga, unable to maneuver, and Akagi requesting destroyer assistance. One transmission from Hiryu recorded at 10:40 reads, "Command of air group transferred to Hiryu. Will launch counterattack." The brevity of the messages reflects the loss of coordination, yet each signal was sent with procedural precision, as if the form itself could preserve order. At 1100, Hiryu launched its first counterstrike, 18 dive bombers, escorted by fighters, against the only enemy carrier, then in sight, Yorktown. The American task force log records radar detection at 133 miles, bearing 320. Enemy planes approaching vector fighters. The next entries move in 1-minute intervals. 11:25 enemy in sight. Open fire. 11:29. 2 bombs hit flight deck. 11:31 severe damage forward. The brevity of these notations parallels those from the Japanese side written 1 hour earlier. Each side recorded the other's accuracy without metaphor. The Japanese strike leader's after-action report, filed later on Hiryu, confirms the target and timing. Attacked enemy carrier. 2 direct hits observed. Large explosion amidships. Smoke rising 3,000 meters. His conclusion, target dead in water. For 20 minutes, both fleets believed Yorktown destroyed. At 11:55, an American engineering entry counters that assumption, power restored on 1 generator. Damage control parties extinguishing fires. The coexistence of these lines, each written in isolation, unaware of the other, illustrates the structural tension of conflicting records. At 12:45, Hiryu launched a second wave, 10 torpedo bombers. The attack reports are consistent in both archives. Yorktown's radar detected the incoming formation at 20 miles. Engaged by Cap fighters, 2 torpedoes struck starboard side 13:30. Engines stopped, listing 20 degrees. The Japanese pilot debrief reads, target burning. Enemy carrier crippled. Returned to base. Again, both sides recorded success. The truth lay between. Yorktown was disabled, but still afloat. The destroyer Hammond took station alongside to assist repairs. The log notes, towing operations, commenced. The air above the Pacific remained thick with scattered combat. Reports from Enterprise and Hornet mention continuing dogfights and isolated attacks. The tone of the documentation shifts from clear sequencing to overlapping times, reflecting the confusion of multiple actions occurring simultaneously. American gunners recorded unidentified aircraft splashed, while Japanese escorts reported enemy fighters persistent. In the archive, these concurrent entries appear on facing pages, 2 interpretations of the same sky. By mid-afternoon, Hiryu herself became the final target. Enterprise and Hornet launched follow-up strikes between 1500 and 1600 hours. Air Group 6's mission summary lists target remaining enemy carrier. Time of attack, 1703. The sequence of observations resumes 2 direct hits, fires spreading, ship stopped. The Hiryu log, preserved through fragments, ends at 1710 with the final transmission. Fire uncontrollable. Prepare to abandon ship. After that, the record breaks into silence. The pattern of conflicting reports persists even in the aftermath entries written hours later. Japanese situation summaries compiled aboard surviving cruisers continue to list Yorktown as sunk. American reports list 3 Japanese carriers destroyed. Both were incorrect at the moment of writing. Each side saw what procedure required them to see. The next day's confirmations would correct the balance. In tone and structure, these records are nearly indistinguishable. Whether written in English or Japanese, they follow the same bureaucratic cadence, time, observation, outcome. Their contradiction lies not in fabrication, but in isolation. Each record was complete within its own horizon of knowledge, incomplete beyond it. The historian reading them today confronts overlapping factual geometries, points of data that intersect without merging. Late in the evening, fragments of radio traffic continue to appear in the intercept logs. 1 American message, Yorktown under tow, attack repelled. 1 Japanese transmission, Akagi and Kaga burning beyond recovery. Command transferred. The 2 signals crossed somewhere in the ether, each confirming survival to its own command. Both were already obsolete when received. In the physical archive, the documents of this phase are often burned or water-stained. Pages retrieved from Akagi show partial sentences blurred by smoke or seawater. The surviving sheets from Yorktown end abruptly with the notation, torpedo hit, power failure, end of record. The aesthetic of damage thus becomes a form of metadata, where language stops, material evidence continues. The aerial attacks recorded between 1020 and 1700 define the battle's escalation. They display the structural symmetry of action and retaliation of loss duplicated. In these hours, 4 carriers burned, 3 Japanese, 1 American, and the written record from both sides narrowed into fragments. The skies over Midway had become an archive written in fire, each bomb a punctuation mark in the sequence of procedure. When the final line of the day's transmissions ends, it reads simply, "Signal strength fading." The horizon that morning had been clear. By evening, it was obscured entirely by smoke. The administrative voice that began the day, counting bearings and ranges, now measures only silence. The battle continues in the next set of documents, but within the pages of this record, the air war has reached its terminus, the point at which notation can no longer keep pace with combustion. Between 1100 and 1300 hours, on 4th June 1942, the surviving records on both sides of the Pacific narrow into a single focal point, the moment when USS Yorktown CV-5 came under direct attack from Japanese dive bombers launched from Akagi and Soryu. The documentation of that episode exists in duplicate American and Japanese, each precise within its own frame of reference, each incomplete without the other. The Yorktown Action Report records the detection first. Radar contact bearing 320 distance, 33 miles altitude, 14,000 feet. The note is entered at 11:06 local time. 2 minutes later, general quarters sounded. Fighters vectored for interception. The next line, written in block capitals by the signal officer, reads simply, "Dive bombers." Below it, in the same hand, commenced firing with 5-inch and 1.1-inch batteries. These entries mark the beginning of the phase that would remove Yorktown from the battle. The Japanese counterpart to this sequence appears in the Hiryu and Soryu flight logs, later recovered and translated. The leader of the dive bomber section, Lieutenant Michio Kobayashi, filed his after-action statement immediately after landing attack, executed 10 hours. 2 direct hits confirmed. Target carrier enveloped in smoke. In the same folder, a deck log from Akagi lists Attack Group 18D3A Type 99 aircraft launched, 1045 returned, 1155 losses. 2. These numbers detached from emotion form the operational mathematics of destruction. The Yorktown's gunnery record continues in short-clipped syntax. 11:25, 2 bombs struck flight deck. Forward elevator destroyed. Fires amidships. 11:29, power loss in engine rooms. Smoke in communication spaces. 1131, steering control intermittent. The engineering supplement elaborates. Hit number 1, penetrated flight deck, exploded in uptakes. Hit number 2, near island structure, caused secondary explosions. Each line retains the grammatical economy of technical testimony. There are no verbs of feeling, only function. A corresponding Japanese entry in Soryu's log provides confirmation from above. Hit observed amidships. Explosion large. Deck torn open. The brevity of the note mirrors that of its target. The 2 reports, when placed side by side, describe the same instant from opposite altitudes, the downward view of impact, and the upward record of reception. Within minutes, Yorktown's electrical systems failed. The auxiliary control log records power lost 1132, reconnected on emergency generator 1140. Damage control parties are listed by station number. Fire parties forward host line 2, portside. Aviation fuel fire under control. The record's restraint carries more weight than description could. Every line functions as a timestamp of endurance. Medical department notes begin at 11:55. Burn casualties, 18. Smoke inhalation, 7. Operating room established in wardroom. The entries are sequential, typed by a courseman. Patient 041 lacerations, face shrapnel. Patient 052 burns both arms. There are no personal names, only serial numbers and conditions. The impersonal nature of the document is its strength. It testifies without commentary. At 12:03, the bridge log includes a brief interjection by Captain Elliot Buckmaster Ship, still capable of 19 knots. Fires confined. This is the last line written in his hand before the next attack arrived. The same minute, a Japanese transmission sent from Hiryu reported enemy carrier damaged but operational. Preparing second strike. Both documents bear the identical timestamp, 1203. Each believed it described a transitional moment. Both were describing the same one. The second strike launched from Hiryu consisted of 10 torpedo bombers escorted by 6 fighters. The Yorktown's radar noted new contacts at 20 miles 1330. The ensuing entries compress into a few lines. 2 torpedo hits starboard side 1332. Engines stopped. List 20 degrees to port. Power failure complete 1335. Abandoned ship ordered 1345. In less than 15 minutes, the tone of the document changes from mechanical to terminal. The last entry typed before power failure states, "End of record main circuit dead." The Japanese debriefs are equally procedural. Hiryu's air group summary reads, "Second attack group departed 12:30. 2 torpedo hits achieved. Target capsized, observed burning." The word capsized would prove inaccurate, but in context it reflects the assumption of success consistent with doctrine. The record concludes, "Mission complete, losses 1 aircraft." For nearly an hour after the attack, Yorktown remained afloat, listing heavily but stable. Damage control reports compiled later aboard the destroyer Hammond described the scene: fire hoses transferred from destroyer to carrier. Patching of hull attempted. Power not restored. Communications were limited to signal flags and blinker lamps. The phrasing of these notes resembles that of engineering documentation more than narrative. Pump failed 1505. Welding ceased 1510. The abstraction of language hides the human effort implied. At 1530, intercept units aboard Enterprise recorded faint Japanese transmissions. 1 fragment Akagi and Kaga destroyed. Soryu burning. Another Hiryu continues operation. The coded traffic indicates that the Japanese fleet still believed Yorktown to be destroyed. In reality, she was being stabilized by her crew and assisting destroyers. The contrast between belief and actuality underscores the archival theme of misread perception, the same misreading that defined the battle from its start. Photographic interpretation reports filed the following day document the aftermath from aerial reconnaissance. The images show Yorktown stationary smoke still rising from her island superstructure. The report caption reads, "Bomb damage forward starboard side torpedo damage. List 23 degrees. Rescue operations visible." The formality of description transforms destruction into data, as the camera did for the written log. From the Japanese record set, the damage to Hiryu later that afternoon closes the circle of mirrored experience. Her final entry at 1710 reads, "Multiple bomb hits. Fire uncontrollable. Crew abandoning ship." The syntax replicates that of Yorktown hours earlier. 2 navies using identical procedural language documented identical phenomena: heat explosion, silence. The consolidation reports, written in the days that followed, attempt to reconcile these fragments. American compilers note, "Enemy carrier destroyed by combined dive bomber action, 10:20 to 10:45. Japanese analysts record enemy carrier sunk by counterstrike 1200 to 1300. Each side's conclusion is chronologically precise and strategically partial. The overlap of their times defines the central paradox of Midway, simultaneous victory and loss, recorded in separate ledgers. The final page of the Yorktown report contains a postscript added by the Board of Investigation, convened after her sinking on 7 June. It states, "Damage inflicted by dive bombers. Akagi-Soryu groups resulted in total loss of offensive capability. Subsequent torpedo damage caused abandonment. Ship sank under tow, 7 June, position 30°47, N176°23. The phrase Akagi-Soryu groups is underlined in blue pencil, the only color in the otherwise monochrome file. It links the line of cause directly to its source. The Japanese equivalent is a printed casualty list of Hiryu's air group found in the same volume. Beneath the column, losses in action. June are the names of the pilots who had attacked Yorktown. Each is followed by the notation KIA. No commentary is appended. The symmetry of record is complete. The men who sank Yorktown perished the same afternoon their logs were written. Across both archives, the cumulative tone is one of exhaustion without sentiment. The documents describe the physical reality of impact flame and silence, but never declare conclusion. The battle in administrative language does not end. It ceases to be recorded. What remains is a residue of dates, bearings, and the word lost repeated in alternating languages. By the close of 4th of June 1942, the carriers Akagi Kagasoryu and Hiryu were gone. Yorktown still floated mortally wounded. The records of that day typed in different alphabets converge on the same unspoken statement, that the logic of war is most visible when the instruments of its recording fall silent. The surviving documents of the Battle of Midway thin into silence after the afternoon of 7th of June 1942. The last notations concern the attempt to save USS Yorktown CV-5 and the destroyer Hammond DD-412. From that point onward, the record ceases in fragments, lines, incomplete handwriting, inconsistent. What remains is less a narrative than the residue of procedure reaching its end. At 05:30 on 6 June, the Yorktown salvage report begins. Tug Vireo secured tow line to carrier. Progress slow, 5 knots. Every few minutes, an entry follows, list increasing 2 degrees. Pumps continuing. Sea moderate. The tone never varies. Each line documents the mechanical process of preservation, the slow effort to hold matter against water. From Japanese sources, the corresponding day holds only one brief annotation. Kido Butai remnants retiring westward. No contact with Hiryu survivors. The handwriting trails off mid-line. It is the last entry in the operational diary of the combined fleet's first air fleet. After that, no further tactical reports exist for the carriers destroyed at Midway. Administrative silence replaces the routine of flight operations and fuel logs. On the afternoon of 6th of June, the American damage control entries continue in decreasing detail. 15:30, list 26 degrees. Evacuation ordered for non-essential personnel. 16:40. Explosive charges prepared for scuttling if required. 17:05, enemy submarine reported in vicinity. The times remain exact even as communication deteriorates. At 17:36, the notation reads, explosion starboard side, violent shock. Destroyer Hammond broken amidships. The following line, Yorktown hit by same blast, minor flooding, is crossed through in pencil. The next sentence is typed later by another hand. Hammond sank within 4 minutes. After that, the format dissolves. Columns misalign. Sentences stop before their verbs. The submarine responsible, later identified as I-168, is recorded in Japanese patrol logs. Its own report, preserved in Tokyo archives, mirrors the American entry, launched 4 torpedoes at 17:03. 2 confirmed hits. Explosion observed. The report ends with the signature of the commanding officer and the statement, mission accomplished, proceeding east. There is no reference to what followed, no awareness of the fire still burning on the surface. The documentation of one side becomes the erasure of the other. After the explosion, Yorktown remained adrift for another night. The final sequence in her deck log begins at 1900, tow line parted. List 30 degrees, crew ordered to abandon. At 1935, ship darkened. Crew taking to boats. 2010, last boat away. The next line is written at 0200 on 7 June by an officer aboard the destroyer Hughes carrier, still visible heavy port list, no lights. Then 0230, lost from sight. No entry follows. The next page of the ledger is blank. In the medical section of the same file, the final line reads, all patients transferred to rescue vessels. Records incomplete. The words records incomplete are underlined twice. It is both an apology and an epitaph. Photographs taken from Vireo show Yorktown at dawn, her hull tilted, water lapping against the hangar deck. The caption on the back, stamped by the Bureau of Ships, reads, final condition prior to sinking. There is no image of the moment itself. The camera, like the log, stops before the end. The Japanese archives resume briefly on 7th of June. An intelligence memorandum filed by the combined fleet states enemy carrier confirmed sunk. The conclusion is typed, stamped, and filed in triplicate. On the same day, U.S. Naval Intelligence transmitted a message to Washington, 4 enemy carriers destroyed. Yorktown lost. The balance of victory and loss exists now only in the symmetry of these 2 sentences. Both were drafted in offices far from the ocean. Both mark the point at which war becomes paperwork. For the archivist, the physical documents of this moment are distinct from earlier records. They bear traces of the environment in which they were written. Water stains, blurred ink pages, brittle from heat. The marks themselves form a secondary testimony evidence of the circumstances that interrupted the act of recording. The historian cataloging them a generation later added a marginal note, in pencil series ends here. No explanation accompanies it. The Japanese war diary of I-168 closes with a routine sign-off line mission report, submitted 10 June 1942. The American salvage report for Yorktown carries its final entry, dated the same day, carrier presumed sunk position 30°47, N 176°23W. The numerical precision of latitude and longitude restores order where sequence has collapsed. Coordinates become the last complete sentences of the file. After these notations, the archive shifts into administrative correspondence, acknowledgments of receipt casualty lists, distribution memos. The language reverts to clerical formula. Respectfully forwarded, copy to CNO, filed for record. The battle that began with coded signals and radar echoes now survives only as typing. Between the factual beginning and this procedural end lies the unrecorded interval of sinking. That absence is the documentary climax, the moment where writing stops and event continues. The silence following Yorktown's disappearance is mirrored in Japanese sources. The combined fleet's operational diary for June 1942 includes blank pages between the entries for 5 and 8 June. Later handwriting in the margin reads, "Records destroyed with vessels." The emptiness is deliberate preservation. It acknowledges what cannot be rewritten. For days afterward, American patrol aircraft reported floating debris and oil slicks. The patrol log of VP-23 lists debris sighted 0715 position near last known coordinates. The notation "no survivors observed" follows. A later intelligence summary from Pearl Harbor notes the same Yorktown and Hammond both lost. The repetition of phrasing across documents gives the illusion of closure, though each report merely rephrases the absence. In Tokyo, a staff officer attached to the Naval General Staff drafted a memo dated 9 June, results of Midway operation. The text lists 4 carriers lost in action and estimates aircraft casualties at over 300. The final line typed beneath the summary reads, "Further details unknown." It is the last surviving Japanese document concerning Midway. Back in Washington, Admiral Nimitz's report to the Chief of Naval Operations concludes with statistics. Enemy 4 CV sunk. 1 cruiser damaged, 250 aircraft destroyed. Own 1 CV sunk. 1 DD sunk, 150 aircraft lost. Below that, the typed notation, end of report. There is no paragraph of interpretation. The administrative record closes with enumeration, the transformation of fire into numbers. Beyond those pages, nothing remains but silence. In the archival microfilm, the final frames display sheets, half-charred edges darkened. The index stops mid-alphabet. The file titles that follow post-action analysis recommendations belong to a different temporal order, written long after the heat and sound had vanished. The original voice of the battle ends where handwriting ceases to function. The historian reading these final pages confronts not resolution, but the geometry of erasure. Both navies' records written in the same professional language terminate in the same manner. Sentences, unfinished entries without signatures, pages left blank. The absence of conclusion becomes the most complete testimony. One of the final items cataloged in the Midway file is a carbon copy of a telegram sent from the Bureau of Naval Personnel to the families of Yorktown's crew. It reads, "Regret to inform you, your son missing in action, presumed lost with vessel." The rest of the page is blank. The archivist's note beneath it says only "End of Series CV5." No music, no explanation, no triumph. The climax exists in the space where language fails. After the last typed line after coordinates and casualty lists, the sea resumes possession of sound. The archive continues in silence, which is not emptiness, but continuation by other means. What follows is not written. The surviving documents of the Battle of Midway now rest in climate-controlled vaults, some in Washington, D.C. within the Naval History and Heritage Command, others in Yokosuka and Tokyo housed by the Japan Center for Asian Historical Records. Together, they form one of the most complete dual archives of a single naval engagement in the 20th century. Yet neither side's collection is whole. What exists today is the residue of survival pages dried of seawater, microfilm copies made from burnt fragments, typed transcripts derived from dictation, before memory faded. The Yorktown files were recovered in stages. Divers working from the tug Vireo in June 1942 salvaged logbooks and dispatch bags that had floated clear of the sinking hull. Those materials were dried, cataloged, and shipped to Pearl Harbor, where clerks retyped the entries line by line. Some pages, too fragile or water-damaged, were copied by hand. A memorandum dated August 1942 notes original deck log beyond repair, reconstructed from surviving leaves. The reconstructed version became the official record used by the Board of Investigation. The authentic pages, brittle, unreadable, were sealed in wax paper and filed away. They remain that way today, stored in Box 17 Series CV5. Japanese documentation survived by a different path. During the Allied occupation, archival officers from the United States and the United Kingdom collected operational diaries from surviving naval headquarters. Among them were fragments of Akagi Kaga Soryu and Hiryu logs, retrieved from secondary storage on the island of Kure. Many had been copied hastily during the war onto thin onion skin paper. When the originals burned in 1945, air raids, the duplicates became primary sources. In 1948, translators working for the Naval Historical Section rendered them into English, preserving even the formatting column lines, timestamps, and margins so that scholars could study the syntax of procedure as much as its content. What did not survive are the human voices that filled the spaces between those lines. Personal diaries, pilot notebooks, and audio recordings were largely lost. Where letters remain, they exist as administrative attachments, condolence notes, official citations, transfer orders. No single document records what it felt like to watch the horizon burn. The archive's neutrality is absolute, and that neutrality is what allows it to endure. In the decades following the war, the two sets of archives began to correspond across oceans. Japanese historians requested copies of the Yorktown reports. American archivists obtained microfilm of the Kido Butai logs. Through duplication, the documents achieved a strange unity, opposite sides of the same paper joined by reproduction. What was once secrecy became shared custody. Each copy corrects the other's silence. Modern conservationists describe these papers as active artifacts. Temperature, humidity, and light are controlled to prevent further decay. The ink of some entries has faded to gray, the paper translucent. Others remain legible only under ultraviolet light. Every restoration adds metadata, the date of scanning, the signature of the archivist, the notation digitally enhanced. In that sense, the battle continues to migrate from radio to paper, from paper to film, from film to code. Each transition a new layer of preservation and interpretation. Researchers today trace the evolution of these records through their administrative lives. The Yorktown log traveled from Pearl Harbor to San Francisco, then to Washington. The Hiryu diary passed through Yokosuka, then to Tokyo's Defense Archives. Each change of custody is recorded with precision equal to that of the original battle. The archivists who maintain them rarely use the word artifact. They prefer evidence. The distinction matters. Artifacts end. Evidence continues to testify. There remain uncertainties. Several message intercepts cited in American intelligence summaries have not been located. The microfilm reels labeled JN-25B Traffic, May-June 1942, contain gaps. A few Japanese flight rosters stop mid-page. Historians disagree about whether those absences result from loss at sea or deliberate destruction. No conclusive proof survives. The absence itself has become part of the archive, a reminder that history's perimeter is defined as much by what is missing as by what remains. Visitors to the National Archives can request microfilm roll 92C frame 001-0874, Battle of Midway Carrier Operations. The film opens with the line typed by a communications officer aboard Enterprise enemy sighted bearing 320. The frame ends with the words, signal strength fading. Between those two sentences lies the entire arc of the battle. Reading them now in fluorescent light, the distance between event and evidence measures not in miles or years, but in the interval of silence that follows each transmission. The Japanese archive presents a similar closing gesture. In its catalog, the file Combined Fleet Operations, June 1942, concludes with an empty form, a pre-printed page for the next day's log that was never filled. The sheet remains blank. Archivists have preserved it, deliberately noting left unused after loss of fleet. The emptiness is as carefully maintained as any written word. The story of the records is ultimately the story of survival through substitution. Voices became signals. Signals became transcripts. Transcripts became data. Each translation preserved the structure but diluted immediacy. Yet the precision of those administrative voices allows the event to remain intelligible. The neutral phrasing, fire uncontrollable power, lost abandoned ship, transcends language, bridging across time without rhetoric. It is the reason the archive still speaks. In the present day, the wreck of USS Yorktown rests 3 miles beneath the Pacific, discovered by oceanographers in 1998. The site is protected by the U.S. Navy as a war grave. Surveys conducted by remotely operated vehicles show the hull upright flight deck, collapsed aircraft still in their launch positions. Digital imagery has reconnected the ship's physical absence with the written record above it. Each artifact recovered: an aircraft wheel, a signal lamp. A fragment of railing is cross-referenced to log entries written 80 years before. The sea, once the destroyer, now functions as an archive itself. For the historian, the surviving trace of Midway lies not in victory or defeat, but in continuity. Every generation rereads the same sentences, draws the same bearings, recalculates the same distances. The documents do not change, but the questions asked of them do. They remind us that the precision of bureaucratic language is not the opposite of humanity. It is the form humanity takes when recording its own fragility. What remains unclear: the radio transmissions never received. The missing pilots never found. The unwritten sentences persists as part of the record. The gaps endure alongside the facts. In that coexistence lies the truest echo of the battle, a silence that has never been empty. What if they had not misread the sky that morning? Perhaps the course of the Pacific would have drawn a different line. Yet the archive, indifferent to speculation, holds only what was written and what ceased to be written. It invites us not to resolve, but to listen. Next, we will follow how the technology born in those 4 minutes, radar fire control, and code breaking, reshaped the remaining years of the war, extending the vocabulary of silence into the future. For now, the record stands closed, the ink stabilized, the ocean quiet once more.